Now we want to continue with the first talk, and like last time, Charlie is going to talk to us about 2 Kings. During the second half of Charlie's talk, we want you to engage with us through the chat, so by using the chat box. So please be ready to share your ideas via the chat. And before Charlie is starting his talk, I would like to pray with us. We thank you, God, for this day and for the opportunity to meet online. Thank you for seeing each and every one of us. And thanks for bringing us here today. I want to ask you to open wide our hearts and ears for what you want to tell us today. Please help us to separate the important from the unimportant. And I pray that you will bless Charlie when he's giving us the talk. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. So thank you, Charlie, for preparing, and the stage is yours.
Thank you, Anne. Can you guys see my PowerPoint? Is that working?
Yes.
Right. Okay, so Anne mentioned that we are going to use the chat to share some ideas and thoughts towards the second half of the talk, but I want us actually to practice that a little bit right at the start, because what we are doing in these 4 months are not independent, unrelated things, but they're connected somehow because we're looking at the story of King Hezekiah. So I'd like to begin by just spending a few seconds thinking about what we did last month. And I want you to go back to the previous passage and write in the chat, okay, just one word or one phrase of something that you remember from the Bible talk or the Bible passage from last month. I'll give you 10 seconds to do that, so use the chat, write something. Someone is watching the chat. Actually, 2 persons are watching the chat. Gott is there, you know, looking carefully to see what you're going to write. And then one of us also will be looking through those words that you share, and we will analyze them, and at some points we'll share them with you as well. So thank you very much. You know, keep posting for the next minute or so. But last time we discussed effectively 3 things. First of all, we talked about faithfulness and the importance of faithfulness, and how Hezekiah put away idols that had been deeply ingrained in the life of Israel. And you thought about some of those idols in your own lives over the last month. And then we talked also a little bit about the complexity of faithfulness, because not all of these idols were apparent. Some of those idols had the names of Moses or Solomon attached to them. And therefore getting rid of some of those things wasn't really straightforward or easy. And sometimes to be faithful to God in our contemporary culture is not always easy and straightforward. And then finally we talked about the link between success and faithfulness. Hezekiah reformed worship, he was faithful to God, and he was successful in the things that he did. And that's quite tricky, because if you just zero in on this one particular truth, it is possible to come up with a very simplistic view of life and relationship to God. But this is not the whole truth, as we're going to see this today and then in the following months as well. Because as the story unfolds, we begin to see some striking developments. And today's topic, Leading in Your Own Strength, kind of explores some of that. So what happened wasn't really an immediate, instant, resounding success, and the story is a bit strange. So let me go quickly over some of the details of the story. In the year 705, the Assyrian emperor called Sargon II died in battle. He died somewhere in modern-day Turkey. And that was quite a shocking event in the ancient world, because that meant to ancient people that if your emperor, your king, your leader dies in battle, that means the gods are against you somehow. And that weakens always an empire if the leader is killed, the king is killed in battle. And a number of revolts flared up throughout the Assyrian Empire, and Sargon's successor, Sennacherib, had to deal with all of those. And Hezekiah's revolt was one of those revolts using the opportunity. It is important to bear in mind that Hezekiah prepared for his revolt very, very carefully. It wasn't spur of the moment thing like that. So in the book of Chronicles, so this is outside of our passage in Kings, but it's the parallel account of Hezekiah's life in the book of Chronicles. It says Hezekiah set to work resolutely and built up the entire wall that was broken down. So Hezekiah strengthened Jerusalem's defenses by building the wall. And archaeologists have actually discovered some of that. This is the hill in Jerusalem, and if you look here, you can see the Middle Bronze Age wall. That was the old wall which surrounded the city in Jerusalem. And a little bit higher up, you have a much later wall, which was built, still the remnants there of a later wall that was built by Hezekiah. And what Hezekiah did was not just strengthen the city, but actually enlarge it, because Jerusalem is found on two hills. You have the eastern narrower hill here, where you have the temple and the city of David, and this was surrounded by wall. But on the western hill, there were a lot of houses built, and so Hezekiah strengthened the defense of Jerusalem and built a wall that protected all of that. So he was preparing for his rebellion. And then secondly, the book of Kings says that the rest of the deeds of Hezekiah, all his power, how he made the pool and the conduit and brought water into the city. That's something else Hezekiah did. And if you go to Jerusalem, this is a picture of the hill of Jerusalem, and here you can see again where the wall was. The problem with Jerusalem was that the water was outside of the city. And especially if you're preparing for a siege, you needed the water to be accessible to you from inside the walls. And so Hezekiah dug a tunnel, and you can see there the picture, what this tunnel looks like if you go to Jerusalem today. A tunnel whereby people could go underneath the hill, under the under the walls, and they can draw water. So he was preparing carefully. He was investing money into all these engineering projects. And Isaiah refers to that when he prophesies. You saw there were many breaches in the city of David, and you collected the waters of the lower pool. You counted the houses of Jerusalem. You broke down the houses to fortify the wall. You made a reservoir between the two walls, and so on. So these engineering projects were quite striking, and Isaiah refers to them. And then Hezekiah also prepared very carefully for the revolt by building up a lot of diplomatic alliances. If you look at the map of the ancient Near East, Assyria is situated somewhere here in the northern part of, it's my stupid phone, in the northern part of Iraq. And there were nations to the south, Babylon and Egypt, who are not happy with the Babylonians, and Hezekiah made diplomatic alliances with all of these guys, the Babylonians, the Egyptians, the Philistines, and the Phoenicians who lived there. So it was a very carefully prepared rebellion. Hezekiah was not an irresponsible leader. So what happened? He prepared, he did the reform, and it was all resounding failure. And that's where the surprise of this all comes in. Because when Sennacherib came, the book of Kings tells us that in the 14th year of Hezekiah, King Sennacherib of Assyria came against all the fortified cities of Judah and captured them. All the cities, every single one of them. And then Hezekiah sent sends a message to the king of Assyria at Lachish and says, I have done wrong. Withdraw from me. Whatever you impose on me, I will bear. And the king of Assyria imposes a huge tribute on Hezekiah. So it's such a heavy financial burden that, as you can see at the end of this passage, Hezekiah has to take all the silver in the house of the Lord and send it to the Assyrian king. So he empties the coffers. And this is an interesting event because we have actually the notes of Sennacherib himself. We have a text which in which he gives us an account of that campaign, and it sort of confirms what the Bible says and also fills out some of the details of what happened. So Sennacherib has effectively the same thing. As for Hezekiah, the Judahite who did not submit to my yoke, 46 of his stronghold cities, as well as all the smaller towns in the area, I besieged and I took. 200,000 people, great and small, male and female, horses, mules, asses, camels, cattle, sheep without number, I brought away as spoil. Okay. And then he says, I added to his former tribute, and he gives a list which not only confirms what the Bible says about the tribute, but actually adds more detail. So it was not just gold and silver that Hezekiah had to send to the king. It was, as you can see, gems, jewels, couches, elephant hides, as well as Hezekiah's own daughters, his harem, his male and female musicians. So it was a complete disaster. Okay, there was a lot of money, a lot of people flowing out of Judah and going to the Assyrians. It was a demographic crisis, and the whole country was overrun. And there is another interesting piece of information that sort of confirms and fleshes out this picture even further. The city of Lachish was the second biggest city in Judah after Jerusalem. And you can see on the screen there pictures. On the left-hand side, you can see a reconstruction of what the city looked like, or would have looked like. You know, it's an imaginary reconstruction. And on the right-hand side, you have some pictures of some of the remains of the city today. And Sennacherib besieged that city and he took it. He was so happy with that he, in his palace, he had a whole room which had pictures carved in stone across all the walls that told the story of this capture, because it was such a strong city and it was such a resounding military success. Let's just imagine for a second that you're a famous actor and you're nominated for the Oscars at the age of 25, and you're given the Oscars. And because you're rich and you have a house with many, many rooms, you have one room which is called the Oscars room. And you have pictures of the ceremony and the film and everything else. And every time you're a bit depressed, you can go into that room, look at the pictures and relive that moment. That's a little bit what Sennacherib did. And you can actually see that room if you go to London and go to the British Museum. That's what the room looks like, you know, because the Brits lifted up all these stone reliefs and transported them, and you can see them there. So I'll show you a couple of pictures from that, and I want you to look at that picture now. And that will be our first response. So at the top picture portrays the siege. I want you to look at that picture and identify one object that you find interesting and write it in the chat. Okay. King on the throne. You're looking at the second picture, okay? And we'll come back to that. But you're right, you know, you can see the walls of the city. You can see how All the people are coming from every direction. You can see them crawling up, you know, on all these ladders to overtake the walls. You can see soldiers with archers. That's absolutely right. Lots of spears and sticks and weapons. Yes. A tower. Yeah, that's an important one. So you can see here that you can see the towers on the walls and how they're taking them over. So you can see some of the details of that siege. Now look at the bottom picture. This is a different picture, okay, of a different moment in the siege. And I want you to look at that, and I have two questions. First one is, where is the king? And the second one is, what is this a picture of? So have a look at the picture and write. Yes, you're absolutely right. You're brilliant. So your powers of observations are great. The king is on the throne on the right. As you can see, he's sitting on the throne, and there are all these people streaming towards him. And you're also right that that these are slaves or captives. This is the people are taking away all the belongings. And there is a very interesting comment. It reminds me of the crucifixion, and that's an interesting, because there are indeed people who are being executed and tortured in that picture. The picture at the top shows you the siege, and the picture at the bottom shows you the aftermath of the siege, when people were taken away as captives and as slaves to the Assyrian king. So the reason I wanted to show you this in a little bit of detail is because it was a disaster for the people of Judah. It was a really, really tough time for them as a nation. Okay, they had reformed, they had prepared, they had built the wall, they had built the tunnel, they had water in the city, they had made all these diplomatic alliances. The Assyrians came and it destroyed their country. In Egypt, the alliance, the power that they relied on for protection, did not deliver. So you can see, I asked you in your preparation for today to look at the passage and note what Rabshakeh says about Egypt. And Rabshakeh implies that Hezekiah relies on Egypt for support. He relies on the Egyptian cavalry and military might. Actually, even though it's not very clear in the passage, we do have a hint that Egypt tried to help. If you look at chapter 19, that's the passage we'll look at next week. But in chapter 19, it says that the king heard that King Tirhakah of Ethiopia had come. And Tirhakah of Ethiopia, you can see a picture of him up there. He's a handsome guy. This was an Ethiopian king who was, at this stage, he was actually the king's son. He became later on king, and he was the king of Egypt. So the Egyptians, ruled by this Ethiopian dynasty, tried to help, but they couldn't. And Sennacherib gives us a bit more detail of that. He says that they called upon the Egyptians, kings and bowmen and chariots and horses of the king of Ethiopia, and they came a countless host. So a big Egyptian army came to help against the Assyrians, and they were unsuccessful. The Egyptian charioteers and princes, together with all the Ethiopian kings, my hands captured alive in the midst of the battle. So the Egyptians were unsuccessful. So the main question is, why the disaster? Why the disaster? Hezekiah was good, he was faithful, and yet you have all these capture of slaves, loss of revenue, all the cities destroyed. So I want to give you 20 seconds to think and write, speculate. You don't know what I'm going to say, obviously. Well, you kind of do, because this is called leading in your own strength. So it probably has something to do with that. But try and speculate a bit. Why the disaster? Good question. See, Mailing thinks it's a good question. Why the disaster? Wrong timing. Not asking God. God doesn't owe us anything. So it is a good question. Let me kind of try and answer it. Obviously, we can't really go into a lot of depth and detail, but let me give you an idea. And to understand this better, we need to look at the book of Isaiah. Have a look at this passage from Isaiah that we already quoted, where Isaiah talks about some of these engineering projects that Hezekiah undertook, and see if you can find an answer in that particular passage. You see the last sentence, right? You did all these things, but you did not look to him who did it or have regard for him who planned it long ago. So Hezekiah was doing things, but there was something wrong in the way that he was doing things. And on Moodle, I asked you when you were preparing to read Isaiah chapter 13. That's an oracle which Isaiah preached as the revolt, before the revolt broke out, when Hezekiah was preparing. And when you look at this oracle, you can see that Hezekiah did exactly what the Assyrians were saying in their speech. He had a plan, and he was formulating an alliance with Egypt. He was relying for protection of Egypt, the protection of Egypt, the shelter, but he was not relying on the Lord. There is another passage that you can look at in your own time in the following chapter in Isaiah, where Isaiah again criticizes the leaders of Judah for relying on Egypt for horses and chariots and horsemen. And horses, Isaiah says, are flesh. They're just human expression of human military power. And therefore, because Hezekiah relies on Egypt for protection rather than the Lord, Isaiah says it's going to go horribly wrong. The Lord will stretch out his hand, the helper will stumble, and the one who helped will fall, and they will all perish together. So what the people of Judah were experiencing in the early stages of the Assyrian conquest was the fulfillment of of Isaiah's warning. Hezekiah had acted in his own strength. He was doing it in the wrong way, and therefore he was going to fail. So let's think a little bit about the meaning of all that for us. And I want you now to spend a minute and think about the question, is planning bad? I've emphasized the fact that Hezekiah planned a lot. Very carefully, he invested a lot of energy and resources in planning. And that's and he was unsuccessful because the Lord was in it. And that raises for us the question, is planning bad? In a lot of Christian approaches and traditions, there is often this idea that if you're spiritual, you're not going to plan, and if you plan, therefore you're not spiritual. And when you read this passage, it almost, invites maybe the idea that this is maybe correct. So maybe if Hezekiah wasn't planning, it would have been all fine. If he didn't build a wall, if he didn't have a tunnel, if he didn't make all these alliances, was that his mistake? Is planning bad? So let me ask you to think about a plan that you made in your own life, okay? Think about something that you planned and that didn't happen. A plan that did not succeed. And then write in the chat one word or phrase in terms of the call. So we don't want specifics. You don't have to tell us the details of the plan, but why? Think of something that you have experienced in your life and tell us, why did it not succeed? Was it because of your mistake, because of forces that were outside of your control, other people not doing something, the plan was bad? So think about that. I'll shut up for a few seconds, give you space to think. And write the reason, why did the plan go bad? Let me very quickly share with you something that has happened to me. When I finished my doctorate in England, I went back to Bulgaria, and I had a grand plan for my life. And my plan was that I was going to create evangelical theological education in Bulgaria. I was the first evangelical with a doctorate in Bulgaria. And my plan was that I was going to go there and I will work for this college, and I'll create evangelical theological education, we'll train the pastors. And that plan went completely wrong. Okay, it was a complete disaster. I'm not going to tell you all the details. We don't have time for that now. But it was a terrible, terrible experience for me. And to this moment, I don't know exactly why my plan failed. I mean, it was obvious that there were a number of different factors, but I had one very clear idea about the way that things were going to work out, and they didn't. And that was really, really disappointing. And so sometimes we make plans and they do not succeed, just like Hezekiah did. And so we are faced with the question, what went wrong and what is the problem? But what I want to kind of stress as we think about the way that we apply this passage is that only idiots do not plan. Okay? These are all pictures of people who do not plan. Okay? That's how you look when you don't plan. Only the idiot does not plan. And part of the reason is because God has given us, that's the way that God has created us. He has given us minds, ability to understand how the world works, and predict, not predict, but anticipate events. And therefore planning is part of the way that we are created as human beings. However, the reason why Hezekiah's plan went wrong was because he did not look to God. And that is a very difficult thing to define. What does it mean to look to God? It is difficult to define because it boils down to a attitude. There isn't really a specific set of actions that enable you to look to God. It is the way that you approach life, the way that you think about events, the way that you sort out your priorities. You may plan and look to God. You may not plan and not look to God. The two things are not related to one another. And so this is, let me ask you the last question to think about. Think about your own experience and think, how do you, as a person, look to God? What do you do to make sure that you see where God is at work in your plans, in your aspirations, in your dreams? And again, if you feel comfortable to share one word that maybe reflects that, please do that in the chat. But what do you do to look to God and make sure that your plans are not made in your own strength? So today we're thinking about strength, and Igor is going to talk about Strength Finder in the way that we appreciate our strengths. And Hezekiah's passage could be taken to mean that our strength is something bad. But what I'm trying to suggest to you is that understanding our strengths is not necessarily something that leads us to rejecting God. It is not a choice between planning and following the Spirit, between our strength and God's strength. It is the question of how we combine those two things. It is the question of how we use our abilities and resources and strength in the context of God's work and in the context of what God is doing. And let me, as I finish, say that this is not the end of the story. Okay? We have looked at one segment of it, and Hezekiah's complete failure to use his strengths to the glory of God. And maybe you and I find ourselves in situations like this. We rely on our own strength and we fail. But this is not the end of the story. And because Hezekiah failed, does not mean that he did not have opportunities to change things. And we'll look at those in the following months. But for now, I think we are going to stop, and I'll pass things back on to Anne. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Charlie, for all your thoughts and everything you prepared for us. Thank you. We are going to have some time in our community groups, and for that we will put you in breakout rooms. And one last time I will repeat it. Everybody who hasn't changed the name to community group number, name and country, feel free to do that now so that we can put you easily in those community groups. When you are in those groups, please use the first 5 minutes to reflect on the following question. Where did I fail in worship and faithfulness in the previous month? We will also put the question in the chat box. When the 5 minutes are over, you can start to talk about that question in your community group. And when you are done with that question, we have another question for you. What and how is God speaking to you amidst those failures? So please use the first 5 minutes for yourselves to reflect on the first question, then share about that in your community group, and then you can go to the next question. All in all, we have 15 minutes. We wish you a blessed time and enjoy this time in your community groups. Back, everybody. Thank you, Alice, for your DJ moves. I hope you had a great and inspiring time together. I hope you had the chance to really exchange your experiences. Now we are getting to the second and a bit shorter part of the evening. I think most of you guys took the Strength Finder test. And Igor, he's going to talk to us about that. So Igor is living in Latvia. He's the, I looked it up, Associate Regional Secretary for IFES Europe and the main leader for Formacion. And he's also a Strength Finder coach. So he trains people to understand and to work with this test. So Igor, what did you prepare for us?
Yeah, I prepared to somehow to help you make a sense of the test or result, at least to set you in a journey to have a better understanding and also connect with the talk what Charlie just shared with us. And let me share the presentation, and you could follow that and also comment during the conversation in your chat box. I believe many of you have siblings, brothers and sisters, and unavoidably you compare yourself with them and you believe that you are better than them. Maybe it's not exactly the same way how this guy in front of the mirror, he compares himself with himself, but often we compare ourselves with others and we think we are better, but also, you know, and if you're honest with yourself, you understand there's a certain areas where you are not good and you're not so strong. And we were talking about, and we thinking God's perspective on things. And we, through this journey, and especially through the Hezekiah, we're growing in awareness of God. But it's a journey of growing in awareness of calling. God has a purpose for our being here in this earth. And that means the purpose of our being in this earth, it's connected with things, what we have. And we have a strengths, we have abilities, and it's a God's gift. And those things are connected with one another because what we have, it has a purpose. But the reality is, sooner or later, we also experience that our strengths often become our biggest contributor to the failure. As we saw for Hezekiah, it's very quickly, it could lead us to independence, and we more rely on abilities, what we could accomplish. But before we go in a journey, more discover of those strengths and what we have, you will go in a breakout rooms, and you only will be with the two people, somebody whom you never met. It's not from your group, but you will be asked to share and to think at this stage, what is your awareness regarding in two questions? To connect well with the people, what do you need? And to do the task well, what do you need? It's more assessing the self-awareness at this stage, at this moment, before we go onwards with your test results. If Melin, you could send them in the breakout rooms for 5 minutes, and each of you could share 2.5 minutes, and then you come back and we'll continue the journey of self-awareness. What should I do? How I should, they think how much they should accomplish today. And then either they're really good planners, they're really good thinking ahead of them, the week, and that's natural for them. And when you ask, how was your day? If they succeeded 80% of the task list, they feel good about it. If 50, so day. If only 10 things, then think bad day has been bad. And that's who they are. And they're really, and because of that, they're really good in accomplishing things. It's not because they've been asked only, but it gives the sense of fulfillment. Influencing strength is a people really who are good in engaging with the crowds, with a larger group of people. They need the people. They get energy from people. They're really good on a stage. They're really good, breaking the ice. They're really good in connecting with the strangers. They get that energy. And if you ask those people, how was your day? They just would look from the point, did they make the impact in connection with the people? Did they connect well with the people? What kind of interaction? Did they took a part of something bigger than themselves? And it's more related with the people than with the task. Then relationship building domain, it's a people who really naturally take interest to other people. If influencing kind of more looking in connection with people with a crowd, the relationship building people are more connecting one-to-one. They're really good listeners. They remember what you shared. They remember your name. They're asking your name. If you ask those people, how was your day? They would think not so much what they have done it, but how well they connected with other people. And if they had a deep conversation, good conversations, good interactions, they feel they was been really good. And strategic thinkers, it's people who really engage with ideas. They like to be alone in some ways, but they don't mind to be also with other people. But the center would be ideas. And if you ask them, how was your day? They more kind of reflect, have they discovered something new? Have they able to figure out something? Have they kind of solved the data issues or learned something new? This is kind of a reference point becomes as what is your day? And all of those things are the gift from God. And that's why there's certain tasks which we naturally are better at certain tasks. But that's related. during the or growing the journey and discovery, we realize certain tasks give us energy, certain tasks don't, and we tendency have it to do things which gives us more energy. Then you could put in a chat box in a minute when you think about your results. And I hope that all of you, if not by the end of this meeting, you can finish your test. But if you put in a chat box, did any part of your report surprise you? What questions do you have at this stage when you look at your report? You could please share in the chat box for a few minutes, and I will post. It helps me to better understand where you are with those results, and that would help me adjust what I communicate further. Just put in a chat box, is any surprises, anything, any questions you have at this point. Well, that's good that you realize that not everybody thinks like you. And I would suggest if some of you who still questioning some of the descriptions, share with your best friend or with the parents and see if they could relate. Again, the Strength Finder is the language which enables you articulate something what's already there. Basically, the Strength Finder looks from outside, how you appear from outside. Yeah, some of you kind of feel sad that you don't have covered all the 4 domains. Me too, because if you look on those 4 domains, like executing, if you kind of use the image of the body, it's executing its arms and legs, the influencing is a mouth, relationship is like a heart, and the strategic is the brain. And some of you think suddenly handicap. Like I have top 6 strengths on the 2 domains, executing, influencing. I have arms and legs and I have a mouth, but I don't have a brain and I don't have a heart. We could tempted to think that way, but be careful, don't label this way. All of us could relate, all of us could influence, all of us could do this work. Otherwise you will not be students or not be graduates. But there is a unique contributions you could do through the strengths you have. Thank you for engaging and sharing. I will go further with this, and the value of the test, the value of the language, is what it does. It helps you to name things, put the words, because sometimes you struggle to describe it. But now the language is being created, which enables you name what the gift God has been giving you. And when you come to the point claiming, yes, admitting it's me, it's like Paul used in Corinthians, body has a different parts, and you admit, yes, I am that part. Then you need, and then you also ask a question, why I'm not mouth, why I'm not the leg? You need to kind of come back to God and say, okay, God, you decided, you gave it for purpose, then aim it for what purpose? How I best contribute to the body with what I have, and stop comparing myself with others who has a different strengths and abilities. Path of the strengths, again, the Strength Finder points to the potential, and it's points that it's a natural way you think, you feel, and it describes that. But if you invest in that, practicing that, then actually it appears as a strength. But if you don't invest, don't learn more about it, it actually could be your biggest weakness. And that's important, kind of this journey. It's not only aware what you have, but develop it. But if you develop it, you need to know for what purposes you've been giving that. And then the strength only will be strength if that serves well to other people. If that only serves you, that is your biggest weakness. And the strength has 2 sides of it, like a coin, 2-sided. If that serves to people well, that is the strength. But if only serves you, that is your biggest weakness. And those 4 domains, as somebody kind of described it in a chat box, it actually shows the way how you view things, how you see things. And think in a moment of the time when you really effectively able fully use your strengths. What contributed to that? And that's connected how you see things differently. But it's just think of in a moment how you time of you when you've been really effective, fully use your strengths. What contributed to that? And you could write in the chat box. I know some of you need more time, but right environment, passion, encouraging. I know you need more time for that, but I think it's good for you to think what environment you needed to be able to contribute well, because that's something points out the way you see things, and also see that other people actually contributing differently. It's, you know the passage also in the gospel where the parable about seed and that 4 soils. We know that God's word was a seed. There's 4 soils, and we can see that even God's word is powerful, but it limited in certain way by environment. And you could look at that also thinking you have a potential, but in certain way your potential could be exposed or contributed in a certain context. And your strengths have a conditions under which they do your best work. And there's this needs when we met, gives us sense of safety, confidence, and helps us look outwards. And in many ways, the way you see things, it's connected with your strengths and strengths needs. And as you see this kind of 2 categories, 4 domains could be put it in 2 categories. Strategic thinking and executing, it's more around a task. And you see what they could contribute. Strategic thinking contribute creating possibilities, direction, information, ideas. But to be able to contribute, they need time, place for imagine, high level why and what, share information, explore ideas and meaning. And executing people, they contribute reality, details, goals, processes, and they need a goal. They need a step-by-step guide. This is the way how they see things, and this is because the only way they could contribute it. That's why they ask those things. But relationship domains, 2 domains, influencing and relationship building. Influencing contributes conviction, ignition, enrolling, engage, energizing. They are those mission evangelists. They're really verbal processing. They talk too much, sometimes too much, but that's the time when they think. They connect, they need a connection with a cause, they need a validation, they need an energy in the room. And relationship building people, they like a glue, they connect with people, inviting, listening, accepting. And what they need authentic relationship, encouragement, listening, not judgment. And when they hear the Jesus question, do you love me? Each of them would respond to that differently. Relationship building people would respond, do you love me? They will kind of hug Jesus and kiss Jesus. If the influencing people being asked, do you love me? They will say, can I mobilize 100 people? And they said, we love you, Jesus. Executing says, Jesus, should I take care? Whom should I feed? And strategic person would ask, love. Love, what do you mean? Agape or filio? They need to understand a deeper thing. And it's not the wrong and right. We just contribute it in unique ways, but it's connected with those, connected with our needs, and those needs kind of points out how we see things. And as I pointed out, all this strengths is like a lenses through which we see, interpret world. And your top 5 very directly influence the values, how you prioritize, how you approach ministry, and your relationships. And more you invest in that, more you recognize there's a strength, but there's also weakness, because your strength limits also a certain way and you need other people. And also how we perceive the failure. And if we don't be careful, that if we don't develop that knowledge and understanding of the strength, and if the strength is not developed, then it's kind of raw talent. It's basically oriented towards ourselves and only serves us well. It becomes a weakness. But if we develop it, and then we actually asking ourselves for what purposes it's been given, it serves to other people, because that's purpose why we have. And if connecting with this biblical language, I would say raw talent, and which is only focused on needs of your own needs, and you try to meet those, it's a lot walking in the flesh. And if you can focusing, how can I bless other people with what I have? That's a walking in the spirit. And then that's why, as I said, our strength is the biggest contributions to our failure. Also, in many ways, because sometimes if we rely too much on ourselves and not asking God, why you've been creating me the way you created, then actually we could easily only kind of use our strength for our own well-being. But we created differently and uniquely. And that's the reason that we contribute in a certain way to the body. And our identity shouldn't be built around what we have. Our identity should be built around the community. And our strength has a purpose in that community. And I want to finish by the Corinthians chapter 12, verse 9. For my grace sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in a weakness. As I said, our strength, it's the biggest, other side is a weakness, because we need to learn how to use it properly. And we cannot do it with our own strength. We need constantly ask God, show me how I could best serve in this situation. That means there is sometimes situations where I cannot do, I need to pause and let somebody else do it, and because they have a different strength. Like if I'm not the mouth, I should be quiet and let the mouth speak. But when I'm leg, I'm bring the body to the certain place. I hope you could talk more in your community groups and especially share your results with the people who knows you well. And you have this journey of self-awareness, which leads you awareness of calling, and that's links to awareness of God. Thank you.